think I relate to any of my characters. I've played a crack addict from Boston. I've played an Upper East Side princess.
Behind the polished sheen of celebrity stardom and cinematic buzz, a murkier narrative has started to unravel. One that places Blake Lively not just at the center of a high-profile film adaptation, but in the middle of a brewing controversy about creative overreach, legal strategy, and what critics are calling narrative manipulation both on and off-screen. What began as standard behind-the-scenes chatter about the upcoming movie adaptation of It Ends With Us has spiraled into a revelation that could fundamentally alter how audiences view not just the film, but Lively's role in it, and her broader public image. At the heart of the storm are newly surfaced text messages, allegedly exchanged among editors and insiders tied to the production, which shed light on the extent of control Lively may have wielded over the movie. What's explosive is not just that she had input, actors often do, but that her influence may have extended well beyond standard boundaries, bleeding into pivotal creative decisions that had no direct relevance to her on-screen role. Specifically, it's her alleged involvement in approving scenes that don't feature her character, particularly scenes involving young Lily, that has sparked accusations of unchecked power and manipulation. One text from Henry Grace, a lead editor on the project, reveals the phrase, "That's going to end up being a Blake call," in reference to whether a particular emotionally charged scene would remain in the final cut. The implication? Decisions typically reserved for directors or creative leads were, in this case, being deferred to Lively. And while lead actors with executive producer titles often weigh in, what these texts suggest is a level of oversight that borders on editorial domination. Grace's frustration is palpable, with his message even including SMH, shake my head, signaling his disbelief at how far Lively's creative reach appeared to extend. What's even more jarring is that her reported influence wasn't just relegated to script changes or performance tweaks. She allegedly had approval rights over scenes entirely unrelated to her character, such as those involving the portrayal of young Lily, arguably one of the emotional linchpins of the narrative. That scene's authenticity is sacrosanct for fans of the original novel, and the idea that it may have been retooled or sanitized to better suit Lively's preferences is deeply concerning to those who see such creative interference as compromising the heart of the story. Further texts among editors, including names like JB, believed to be Justin Baldoni, Rob, and Una, corroborate this dynamic, with discussions indicating that a PG-13 rating had been achieved, celebratory exclamations exchanged, and then the sudden realization that one controversial element, the thrust, might still be at risk due to Lively's final say. Grace's admission that if Blake allows it to stay, it will, makes it clear that final decisions weren't being made in the editing room, but perhaps in private calls or quiet approvals from the actress herself. Even more baffling is how Lively allegedly revised her contractual writer to include approval over young Lily's scenes, raising eyebrows over her desire to exert control over moments where she isn't even present. Why would she do this? One suggestion, as found in the texts, is that she cited feeling unsafe, though what precisely made her feel that way remains murky. The speculation, however, is that this move was a way to regain control of the narrative or perhaps to tailor the final product to ensure it aligned with her public image. The implications of this are vast. Critics have begun questioning whether the film is evolving into a Blake-centric vision, far removed from the raw, unfiltered emotional beats of the source material. And if that weren't enough, her legal maneuvers have also come under fire. Her team's decision to file an entire uncorrected deposition transcript in court, a move almost universally seen as unconventional, has fueled speculation that this was less about legal necessity and more about optics. Normally, legal teams submit only relevant excerpts of a deposition, particularly those that have been finalized and reviewed, but not in this case. Lively's legal counsel filed the entire document, unedited and unchecked, an act that legal commentators have labeled as excessive, risky, and possibly an orchestrated PR distraction. Why would anyone do this? One theory is that it was an attempt to drown out the noise from the Blake call texts by changing the conversation entirely. Instead of dissecting her creative overreach, the media turned to the spectacle of the deposition. What she wore, what she said, and even false claims, like whether Justin Baldoni attended in person, that quickly spread across tabloids like People and the Daily Mail. It became a circus, one many believe Lively's team might have welcomed as a preferable distraction. But it didn't stop the scrutiny. Critics began digging into the transcript itself and noticed several concerning redactions, details omitted without clear explanation. If her case is as solid as claimed, why hide portions? Furthermore, while Lively has alleged a smear campaign against her, purportedly a coordinated effort in response to her raising concerns in the ongoing Wayfair lawsuit, the specifics of that campaign remain vague. Under oath, she was unable to provide definitive proof of an organized takedown, and what she did describe appears to rely heavily on interpretation rather than concrete evidence. This has weakened her claim significantly, especially in the eyes of legal observers who note that mere criticism or rebuttal from the opposing side doesn't constitute defamation or character assassination. Even attorney Bryan Freedman, who represents the Wayfair parties, has pushed back strongly, publicly labeling her claims as baseless. While Lively's team sees this as part of the smear campaign, legal insiders argue that his remarks are par for the course in high-stakes litigation. This raises an uncomfortable question. If the evidence doesn't support a coordinated attack, could it be that Lively is using the language of victimhood to shield herself from accountability? That idea gains traction when you consider the entire media strategy employed throughout this saga. By filing a full deposition, spinning her approval rights as safety concerns, and framing all opposition as targeted harassment, Lively's camp has successfully muddied the waters. But that's a double-edged sword. The attempt to control the narrative so tightly has only invited more scrutiny, not less. In seeking to protect her image, she may have inadvertently exposed the very behaviors she hoped to keep hidden. Behaviors that suggest a level of orchestration, control, and influence that few in Hollywood would dare attempt, let alone so openly. Her involvement in production decisions, her manipulation of the editing process, and her legal strategy all point to someone determined not just to act in a story, but to rewrite it in real time. Whether or not that story will still resonate with fans, or if it's already been irreversibly altered, remains the looming question. For now, Blake Lively's portrayal is no longer just the one on screen, but one tangled in power, perception, and a relentless pursuit of control. As Blake Lively finds herself at the center of a growing firestorm surrounding her alleged behind-the-scenes influence on the film adaptation of It Ends With Us, a deep and disturbing web of media spin, legal posturing, and narrative control is unraveling in full public view. While many first became aware of the issue due to leaked text messages between editors, producers, and others tied to the film's production, what followed was a cascade of speculation, legal filings, and public statements that have left even the most seasoned Hollywood observers reeling. At the core of the controversy lies not only Blake Lively's unexpected and allegedly unprecedented level of editorial control over scenes she didn't even appear in, but also the broader implications of how those decisions may have been made, framed, and now deflected through legal and media maneuvering. The redactions within the filed deposition transcript only amplify the skepticism already surrounding Lively's intentions. The choice to submit a rough, uncertified draft, one not legally required, and to redact certain portions while emphasizing others, created the impression that her team was attempting to shape a very specific narrative while hiding potentially damaging context. Critics have begun to argue that rather than preserving any integrity, these tactics are being used to control the conversation and distract from deeper concerns. As Blake Lively finds herself at the center of a growing firestorm surrounding her alleged behind-the-scenes influence on the film adaptation of It Ends With Us, a deep and disturbing web of media spin, legal posturing, and narrative control is unraveling in full public view. While many first became aware of the issue due to leaked text messages between editors, producers, and others tied to the film's production, what followed was a cascade of speculation, legal filings, and public statements that have left even the most seasoned Hollywood observers reeling. At the core of the controversy lies not only Blake Lively's unexpected and allegedly unprecedented level of editorial control over scenes she didn't even appear in, but also the broader implications of how those decisions may have been made, framed, and now deflected through legal and media maneuvering. The redactions within the filed deposition transcript only amplify the skepticism already surrounding Lively's intentions. The choice to submit a rough, uncertified draft, one not legally required, and to redact certain portions while emphasizing others, created the impression that her team was attempting to shape a very specific narrative while hiding potentially damaging context. Critics have begun to argue that rather than preserving any integrity, these tactics are being used to control the conversation and distract from deeper concerns. Instead of evoking sympathy, many believe this move has called further attention to the holes in Lively's claims. Particularly shaky is her framing of herself as a victim of a coordinated smear campaign. With limited supporting evidence, that narrative is rapidly unraveling. The pressing question now becomes, if the smear campaign is as weak as it appears, what does that mean for the rest of her legal and public arguments? Could the focus now shift back to Lively's own conduct, and what truly motivated her expansive control over a film supposedly rooted in someone else's creative vision? Public frustration reached a boiling point during recent court discussions. The decision to file the entire transcript, uncertified and uncorrected, was met with open criticism, even sarcasm. Many saw it as a disrespectful stunt that weaponized legal processes for publicity rather than justice. The notion that merely invoking claims of sexual harassment or retaliation should instantly grant immunity from critique was heavily challenged. Legal experts, commentators, and even members of the public voiced their concern that such behavior risks undermining genuine victims by conflating strategic narrative control with actual harm. It harms harassment and retaliation victims, one commentator noted bluntly, because it creates noise instead of clarity. Despite the redactions, nothing truly incriminating was revealed, which only begs the question, why go to such lengths to hide something that apparently doesn't exist? Every step Lively's legal team takes now seems overreaching, over-exaggerated, and meticulously choreographed for impact rather than substance. Early on, some were willing to give her the benefit of the doubt, wondering if the full deposition really did need to be submitted for legal reasons. But even that minor grace has begun to erode in light of the broader behavior exhibited by her counsel.
The reason why I did that now so much later, and also because it took me a while, to be honest with you, it took me a while to actually get over it.
This increasingly resembles public relations theater disguised as litigation, with Lively's legal team mirroring the very tactics they accused the opposing counsel, especially attorney Bryan Freedman, of using. The entire spectacle now reads more like a crisis communications strategy than a quest for justice. This brings us to the curious and now viral question. How did details from Blake Lively's deposition find their way into the media in the first place? Publications like the Daily Mail and People ran with oddly specific details, describing her outfit in meticulous detail, from her black jeans and waistcoat to her pale blue cardigan, and even falsely claiming that Justin Baldoni was present at the deposition. Yet neither side is claiming responsibility for the leak. In a classic finger-pointing scenario, Lively's team blamed the Wayfair defendants, alleging a deliberate attempt to harm her reputation. But as with much of the case, these accusations were launched without any hard proof. If anything, the leak raises questions not about who leaked the information, but who benefited. If the intention was to create a sympathetic image of Lively facing off against her alleged harassers in a deposition, the media buzz suggests it may have worked, briefly. But the narrative fell apart under scrutiny. In fact, some now believe that her own team may have orchestrated the leak in a bid to gain public favor, distract from the fallout of the infamous Blake call, text messages, and reframe her image. The false story about Baldoni being in the room, a clear fabrication, only adds weight to this theory. That sort of influence isn't normal, especially in a production where the actor doesn't hold a directorial or lead producing role. One text, "That's going to end up being a Blake call," implies a final decision-making authority that editors typically reserve for the director or showrunner. The frustration of Henry Grace, the editor involved, reveals how unusual and frustrating this process became for others on set. For fans of the book, this could be devastating. The film's ability to capture the essence of Hoover's novel now feels compromised. If Lively made changes to critical scenes to soften or tailor them to her preferences, then the emotional impact readers cherish may be lost in translation. The young Lily sequence in particular is foundational to the entire story's tone. If that authenticity has been altered, and signs point to exactly that, then it's no longer It Ends With Us, but rather Blake Lively's version of It Ends With Us. That subtle distinction could ruin the experience for audiences expecting faithfulness to the book. Hollywood insiders are now watching closely. Lively's behavior could set a precedent for how actors in future productions might attempt to gain creative leverage over scenes beyond their role. Is this a bold evolution of star power, or a troubling erosion of artistic collaboration? Some fear it's the latter. What happens when actors demand approval over narrative beats that don't involve them? What happens when the editing room becomes subject to personal branding rather than collective storytelling? These fears are no longer hypothetical. The deposition and subsequent media frenzy have turned private whispers into public concern. The perception of Lively has begun to shift. Once praised as a professional and poised actress, she is now being viewed by some as controlling, manipulative, and willing to exploit legal protections for strategic gain. Her claims of being the target of a smear campaign grow weaker in light of her own aggressive maneuvering, which some say more closely resemble smear tactics themselves. Legal documents from Wayfair's side have also pushed back hard. In one response to her subpoena attempts, they argue that Lively is shifting blame to their attorney, Bryan Freedman, simply because her case is falling apart. Her 14th cause of action, a bold claim that certain Wayfair parties used post-litigation media statements to defame her, is being challenged as overreaching. Freedman did, in fact, depose Lively, and his questions appear to have exposed major inconsistencies in her case. Her inability to provide evidence of a coordinated smear campaign, beyond vague references to negative commentary, undermines the entire premise of retaliation. The final picture painted by these revelations is not one of a victim fighting against injustice, but of a powerful celebrity trying to rewrite the narrative as events spiral out of her control. If there was any doubt about whether her involvement in the film crossed ethical boundaries, the Blake call text settled it. Approval over scenes she never acted in, alleged writer revisions for young Lily content, and her team's erratic PR handling have drawn a line between creative input and calculated dominance. This is no longer about a movie or even a lawsuit, it's about public trust. Fans are already questioning whether the final cut of It Ends With Us will be what they hoped for, or a compromised version curated to fit Lively's brand. Legal observers are analyzing her team's filings for signs of manipulation rather than merit. The industry is watching closely to see if this will be remembered as a pivotal moment when celebrity control collided disastrously with creative integrity. And as for Blake Lively, the question remains: is she a misunderstood woman fighting a quiet battle, or the architect of her own undoing? In light of her team,